Ecclesiastes chapter 10, verse 5. Solomon is carrying out a great experiment. There's one person who knew. Yes, a great experiment. And in the course of that experiment, he's seen a bunch of things, has he not? And he records a lot of that information in this book in little bitty tidbits. Okay, he doesn't go into just, big, long, lengthy sections about these things, but from different points, we get these little pithy statements about things. And he gets to chapter 10, verse 5, and he says this: "There is an evil which I have seen under the sun." Man, an evil which I have seen. You think Solomon saw any good things in the course of that experiment? I bet he saw some good things. But guess what else? He said, I've seen some evil things too. And what's interesting is this evil thing has to do with a ruler. Notice what he says. "There is an evil thing which I have seen under the sun, as an error which proceedeth from a ruler." Man, have there always been rulers in existence? I got some people that oh no, and I got a few shaking their heads. Yes, folks, from the very creation there was a ruler. Who was that? God was the ultimate ruler, but who was the ruler at the creation in that home of Adam and Eve? Oh, y'all still don't get it. Adam. Adam was the head of Eve, was he not? Man, boy, we're going to have to start all over. Okay? Yes, Adam was the head of the house, wasn't he? He was the head of the wife, and that's the way it has always been. And God created governments, and God put in charge rulers, hasn't He? And so there have always been rulers throughout all history of mankind. Some leaders have been great, haven't they? There's a few rulers that you can talk about and everybody says, wow, what a great ruler that one was. And then there are some that you might just say, well, they're kind of mediocre. Okay? I never have liked that word, kind of ruins the word okra. But they're just mediocre. They're not great, but they're not bad. They're just kind of there leading. Okay? And then there's been some rulers that have been complete failures, haven't there? Complete failures. Notice point D. It is wise for a person who desires to be in a position of leadership to study those who have been leaders in the past, isn't it? Was Solomon in a position of leadership? Yes. In what ways? He was a king, wasn't he? What else? Okay, he was a father over his house. Yes. He was a prophet of the Almighty God. Isn't that what he's doing now? He's giving his prophecy, his revelation from God to man. All of those are positions of leadership. And so Solomon has studied leaders. And he says, I've looked at a leader and I've seen that there's an evil that proceeds from a leader under the sun. And he's going to talk to us about that. But leaders can teach us how to lead, can they not? Leaders can also manifest traits of good leadership. It's amazing how many traits it takes to be a good leader, okay? A great leader, and there's a lot of them. Studying leaders of the past can teach us about the pitfalls of leadership, can it? There's some things that, some people love to be a leader, want to be a leader, and you finally get there and you go, man, why did I want this? Okay, because there are sometimes things are just horrible in leadership positions. And they can provide us with things to do and not to do as a leader. And Solomon is about to warn us about something that a leader does that shouldn't be done. Hey.
Do you think he was talking about himself also?
Possibly. Okay. He doesn't say that, but he very well may have. I know he's fully engaged in this experiment, isn't he? And he's been, he's not one that's withdrawn and just, getting the facts from here to there. So he could be speaking about himself at times. But notice what he says. Here's the error. Folly is set in great dignity, And the rich sit where? In low place. Man, what in the world is he talking about? It's interesting. Solomon here labels an individual by his character. Isn't that something? There is I forget the name of the group. It's a country group, and she sings a song called Heartbreak. And she talks about this guy that she used to date, and she calls him Heartbreak. She didn't call him by his name. She calls him Heartbreak. And so she calls him by the action that he committed. Okay? And here's Solomon, rather than naming a particular individual who has done this, he just names this person Folly. Okay? The person is just named Folly. There was a name by the name of Nabal, and what does his name mean? Fool. Yeah, you could have just called him fool. And even his wife said he's a fool. And so she acknowledged his character. But here he defines, he says, folly is set where? In great dignity. Man, that little word folly means this: silliness. Another definition was dolt. We don't use those words very much anymore, do we? I don't think I've ever heard anybody called a dolt. Have you? So I had to look up the word dolt, so I did. And the word dolt means this: a dull, stupid person, a blockhead. Now that's pretty good, ain't it? Now I've heard them names before, haven't you? Okay. Kind of lightens it up a little bit, you know. So next time anybody calls me a dolt, I'll know exactly what you're talking about. Okay. But notice what Solomon says the problem is. This dolt, this silly, ignorant, stupid blockhead is put where? In great dignity. Guess what? That ain't good. Okay? That is not good. It is a mistake to put an unqualified person into a position of power. That's what he's talking about. Man. They do not have the wisdom to make difficult decisions. Does leadership require difficult decisions? Oh yeah. And folks, sometimes that leader rides a pretty thin line when it comes to his decisions, doesn't it? Depending on what he decides can change the course of the entirety of a nation, can it not? They do not move the enterprise forward, but rather bring harm upon it. Because they're a what? They're adult. They're ignorant. They don't know what they're doing. Folks, you can just, something that can take years and years to build can be destroyed almost overnight by a foolish person put in leadership. They do not serve their constituents, but only serve themselves. They make the person above them look incompetent as well, do they not? You know, if you're in a position of leadership, guess who you count on? You count on those people below you, don't you? Okay? And you either shine or you are a failure based upon what they do. If you've got a bunch of adults under you, then you look like a what? You look like an adult too, and that's not good. You may be a great person, but the wrong people put in leadership positions can destroy things. They see themselves as qualified, but all others know the person is way in over his or her head. Wow.
You just described the entire last 10, 15 years of our political system.
We feel that way sometimes, don't we? We sure do. Notice the lesson. Every leadership position should be filled with extreme care, folks. Okay? Extreme care. We should never just vote on somebody to vote on somebody. You know what? We need to know who that person is and what that person is, because it can make or break the organization. Why are adults put in positions for which they are not qualified? That's the question, isn't it? Why would you put Mr. Folly in a position of great dignity? Well, a few reasons. He's a family member or a friend. Oh, that never happens. Does it? It's unbelievable. I've heard situations where people have told me, oh, we're trying to make a decision for a preacher at this congregation, and man, we're putting in a lot of care, and we're really studying, and we're really vetting these people. And then when it's all over, guess what you find out? The whole thing was political. It was who they knew and who they wanted in there. You know what? That's sad, isn't it? Very sad. How about this one? He's owed something by the person in charge. One of the best ways to get something out of somebody is to make them owe you. Isn't it? I mean, hey, you owe me. Unbelievable. How about this one? The one who appoints him knows that he will be loyal to his cause. He's not qualified. He can't do the job. But I do know this. He will never turn on me. He will support me. He will fight for me. He will do everything I need him to do as long as I'm in this position. So guess what? Whether he's qualified or not, we appoint him. Mistake, isn't it? Folly is set in great dignity. But notice the second part that Solomon makes mention of. And the rich sit in low place. Guess what he just did? He flipped the coin. Okay? Here's a man that shouldn't be in position of leadership, and guess what? He's put in great dignity. And then here's a man who is what? Who is rich. And guess where he sits? He sits in a low place. A low place. What he means is that the individual who is noble and qualified for the position is overlooked. The one who can do the work, the one who has the knowledge, the one who can make the decisions, the one who can move the company forward, the one who can bring success. He's the one who's put on the sideline. That's sad, isn't it? He functions as a capacity that is beneath him. Folks, to be rich, you don't have to be just rich in things or wealth, money. I can be rich in wisdom, can I not? I can be rich in talents. I can be rich in accomplishments. And yes, I can be rich in prosperity, and there are times when those individuals just get overlooked, don't they? The qualified ones. Remember, Solomon says in the previous verse that this is an evil that is done under the sun. And what's amazing to me is how often it's done. You know what? How often it's done. It's an evil. I looked up that little word evil, and Strong defines it as follows: bad. Now that's bad, but listen to some other words. Brown, Driver, and Briggs gives a long list. Disagreeable, malignant, unpleasant, giving pain, unhappiness, misery, displeasing, worse than, sad, unhappy, hurtful, wicked, misery, injury, calamity, distress, adversity, wrong. There is a great evil under the sun when you put folly in great dignity. What will it take for individuals to learn the lesson? That's the question, isn't it? It's not like we don't have qualified people. We just don't what? We just don't put them in places where they ought to be. We overlook those individuals. Questions, comments? Y'all are a quiet bunch. Probably a lot of folks want to say a lot of stuff, but you smarter than that? He continues his illustration in the next verse. I have seen what? Servants upon horses. Wow. And princes walking as servants upon the earth. You know what you call that? Oh, I just figured somebody just spit it out. Role reversal. Isn't it? Here is a prince, and what's he doing? He's walking as a servant. And here's the servant, and he's where? He's on a horse. What's that all about? Okay? It's a great evil done under the sun. And that's what all he's done now is he's illustrated what he just talked about before. Okay? Can you tell a servant when you see one? It's harder to in our society, but it wasn't hard to in that society. Okay? Folks, when you go back and you study the culture and all of the Bible times, you could tell people by their clothing. That's right. You could tell people by their clothing very, very easily. You can tell a person in mourning. You can tell a prostitute. You could tell a servant. You could tell a person who is wealthy. Okay? You just knew by what they wore. Remember the rich man that Jesus talks about was clothed in purple and fine linen. Okay, you could tell. Okay, we're not told the position that he had, but you knew he was wealthy because he was clothed in purple and fine linen. We've kind of degenerated from that a little bit in our society, haven't we? And it's a little bit harder to tell individuals. But here's this man, he's riding on a horse, and everybody sees him, and guess what they say? What's he doing on that horse? That's a servant. And then there's a guy in front of the horse, pulling the horse, and guess what? He's dressed as a prince. And people are saying, what's he doing pulling that horse? He's a prince. There's a role reversal. And it happens much in society. If things are operating as they should, servants are the ones that are walking, princes are the ones riding on horses, right? That's the way it ought to be. But there are times when roles are reversed in a nation. Look at some other examples. The ignorant do the teaching, and the smart are having to absorb their ignorance. Now, that ain't good, is it? You know, when you walk into a class, you would think that the professor, the teacher, ought to be pretty up to snuff, that's a bad word, isn't it, on their subject. And yet, how many times have you gone into a class and you go, oh, are you kidding me? I could have done a better job teaching this, and I don't even know this class. It's unbelievable. A role reversal, isn't it? How about this one? The criminals are in the judges' seats, and the innocents are in jail. Folks, that happens all the time. You know that? It's amazing. And our society right now is in the midst of a massive change. And all these things are coming true even as we speak. You know that? I could just go into the newspapers or into the news and find example after example after example of individuals where the roles are reversed. The man who has never run a business is the one making corporate decisions, while the true leaders have been excluded from the corporate meetings. Isn't that something? The ones who ought to know how to run the business, don't listen to them. And the ones who have no business acumen whatsoever are the very ones trying to run the show. Unbelievable. Sometimes I have to sit and think whether I want to say something or not. Most of the time I say, or not. The unfaithful rule the church while the faithful are sidelined. Well, now that's scary. I've seen that happen, especially when you have men running the church. That gets kind of wicked, you know it? All of a sudden they want a decision made and they'll call in all the unfaithfuls. All the people who they're never there, they never attend, they're not really part of the church, they don't work in any of the works of the church, and they're all called in because I get a vote. I'm a man, I get a vote. And they vote, and they don't have a clue how they're voting or what they're voting for. It's sad. The yes men are exalted, while the true men of wisdom are put to death. The false prophets are exalted, while the prophets of God are marked and avoided. I gave two illustrations from the Bible of things like this. The first one was old Rehoboam. Y'all remember him? After Solomon passed away, Rehoboam was his son. And Rehoboam takes the throne. And Rehoboam knows that transition times in power are very difficult. So he goes to the wise men, the older men in the nation, and he asks their advice about how to handle his reign as king. And what do they tell him? Anybody remember? Ease off. Ease off of what? Yes, reduce the burdens. Solomon, because of the nature of his kingdom and how big it was, folks, it was taxed heavily. Okay? In order to have the things that he had, in order to expand the kingdom to the extent that he did, he had taxed those people unbelievably. And so the wise men said, hey, if you want the nation to continue, if you don't want the kingdom to divide, then guess what? Ease up on their burdens. Okay? And if you just ease up on their burdens, guess what? Everything will be fine. But he goes to the young men. And he asks the young men, does he not? And the young men give just the opposite counsel, don't they? You thought my dad's reign was hard? You wait for mine. And so he made their lot even worse, did he not? So when all Israel saw that the king hearkened not unto them, the people answered the king, saying, what portion have we in David? Neither have we any inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel! Now see to thine own house, David. So Israel departed unto their tents. Do you hear how they're divided? They're referred to as the son of Jesse. That's one group. And the others referred to as what? Israel, the northern kingdom. Folks, it is what split the kingdom right down the middle. Let me ask you something. Was there another man standing in the wings to pick up the pieces in Israel? Yeah. And guess who he was? Anybody know? Jeroboam. Okay, Jeroboam. So you have Rehoboam over the south, Jeroboam over the north, and now Jeroboam takes control of the north, does he not? And immediately sets up golden calves in Dan and Bethel. Immediately changes the priestly system and changes the Day of Atonement to another month. What did he just do? He just developed a brand new nation, did he not? And that kingdom remained divided for the next hundreds of years. And guess what? There was never a righteous king over Israel, the northern kingdom, ever, ever, ever again. Isn't that sad? One decision by one dolt. And that's true, isn't it? Changed the nation of Israel forever. Unbelievable. Notice the second example, 1 Kings 22, verses 1 through 28. Ahab. Ahab is about to go to battle with the king of the southern kingdom. And the king of the southern kingdom, he's a little bit concerned about this battle. And he says, you know, we really need to go and consult. Who did they used to consult before battle? The prophets. Okay? The prophets. See, these are the guys who can do what? They can see the future, can't they? They know what God's will is. So Ahab, he says, oh, wonderful. I'll get my prophets in here and we'll consult them. And he does. And who are they? They're the prophets of Baal. And guess what they tell Ahab? Yeah, go ahead. You heard that old saying, go ahead, gourd head? Yeah, that's what they told him. Oh, you're going to win this battle. Don't worry about it. Everything's going to be wonderful. You're going to overthrow the enemy. Well, the king of the south, he knows who these guys are. And he's concerned. And he says, don't you have one more guy we could talk to? Did they? Oh, yeah. A prophet by the name of Micaiah. Okay. But Ahab didn't want to use him. Okay? Why did he want to use him? Ahab says this, because he never speaks good concerning me. That's a hoot, isn't it? Well, they go ahead and they go get him. Okay? The guys that go get him, they said, now, Micaiah, we need to tell you something. The prophets of Baal have already predicted victory. So you might as well just go ahead and go along with it. Okay? Just go along to what? Get along if you know what's good for you. So Micaiah walks in and guess what he tells him? Everything's wonderful. Go to battle. You're going to win today. That's what he tells him at first. And you know what he says? Quit messing with me. He could tell. You messing with me. Okay? You tell me the truth. And so he does. He says, if you go to battle today, you will not come back. Man, Ahab is fired up, son. He is one mad king. He takes the prophet and locks him up. And he said, you'll stay there till I get back. And he told him, you're not coming back. Wow. You see, you've got 450 prophets who are a bunch of dolts. And you've got a king who is a dolt. Don't you? And they've got it all reversed. They don't want the man who has the truth, who knows the truth. He wants a pretty story. He wants somebody to tickle his ears. He wants somebody to tell him lies. So guess what he does? He goes to battle, doesn't he? So the king died. There it is. Does anybody know how he died? Nobody? They're in the midst of the battle, and one of the opposing forces just randomly shoots an arrow up into the air. Now, he's got on his armor and all, but there's kinks in the armor, aren't there? The arrow just happened to go right through the kink. Had to take Ahab off the battlefield. His blood ran out of the chariot, and the dogs licked his blood. And was brought to Samaria, and they buried the king in Samaria, and one washed the chariot in the pool of Samaria, and the dogs licked up his blood, and they washed his armor. Listen to this, according to the word of the Lord, which he spake. Folks, who you listen to matters, doesn't it? When you put false prophets in charge, and you put dolts in charge like that, guess what? You're going to run into some major problems. And Ahab did. Questions, comments?
It sounds like the inmates are running the asylum.
There you go. And that's about what it is. It sure is. Yep, the inmates are running the asylum. It's amazing. Isn't it funny how this book was written thousands of years ago, but yet it reads like the daily news, doesn't it? Just unbelievable. All of a sudden in verse 8, Solomon just changes the subject. Remember I said he's got so many things on his mind that he'll say a little thing and then all of a sudden, boom, he changes the subject. Oh, are you kidding me? He that diggeth a pit shall fall into it. And whoso breaketh an hedge, a serpent shall bite him. Now we understand the first part, but we may not understand the second part as well. Okay? True or false? Digging a pit is wrong. No? Okay. Number 2, tearing down a hedge is a sin. No. In and of itself, neither one of those two things are wrong. Is it? So Solomon has to be relating something to us that has something else behind it other than just digging a pit and falling into it. That happens, doesn't it? Or you're out working in the yard and a snake bites you. You didn't mean for the snake to bite you. You weren't trying to do anything sinful. There's something else behind these actions.
Like
When actions are taken, intent matters. You know it? Why are you doing this? That's what matters. You know it? The action in and of itself may be totally innocent. But why you are taking the action could make the action sinful, can it? Solomon talks about 2 evil actions a man might try to take against his neighbor. He might dig a pit, hoping his neighbor will what? Fall into it. A neighbor may have a hedge up, and he doesn't want the hedge up because the hedge limits his access to his neighbor. So guess what I'm going to do? I'll just take down the hedge. Ha ha ha. Man. Point C there. Solomon warns individuals, doesn't he? Who enjoy plotting evil against others. Man. It's possible that one who digs the pit will what? Fall into it. Absolutely. It's possible that while he is removing the hedge, he might be bitten by a serpent, mightn't he? Man. Sometimes what goes around comes around. That's that old statement, is it not? It's unbelievable. And I gave one of the best examples that I think is found in Scripture. You know? Oh, Haman. We did our Bible Bowl on Esther, didn't we? And we got about 12 or 14 people in here that know Esther better than I do. Okay? And Haman was in that story, isn't he? Who was Haman?
Miserable gent who just couldn't stand to have the Jew have power.
Okay, but who is he? He was what? Okay, he was second in command of Persia. Okay, we have a king by the name of Ahasuerus, who is the king, and he has Haman appointed as his second in command. Okay, when Haman took that position, Haman looked at that position as if I am a little God. Okay? That's the way Haman looked at that position. And he expected everybody to honor him in that position, even including worshiping him. When he walked by, you bowed to Haman. Okay? Unbelievable, isn't it? Well, the Jews lived in the land of Persia because they had been carried into Babylonian captivity prior to the Persian Empire taking over. So when Persia took over, the Jews were there, weren't they? And the old law says this, thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and Him only shalt thou serve. You don't bow down to a man. Mordecai is a very powerful man, isn't he? Wise man, influential man. Has some access into the palace. Knows some individuals. Influential. And he refuses to bow to Haman, doesn't he? And so every time Haman walks by, everybody bows except one little Jew. Named who? Mordecai. Haman gets invited to a luncheon, does he not? Who invites him? Esther does. Okay? Now, there's only 2 people at the luncheon. Just 2. Think about that. The queen is throwing a banquet for 2 people. One of them is her husband, the king. Okay. And the other one is who? Haman. Let me tell you something. You know, if the President of the United States and his wife invite just you to their house to eat, you might be somebody. You know that? And you ought to feel good about that, hadn't you? Man, look at me. Well, he goes to the banquet. Everything's wonderful. He's invited to another banquet tomorrow. How wonderful is this? I may eventually get to eat at the king's table all the time. But as he's going home from the first banquet, guess who he sees? Standing. Not kneeling. Standing. So he goes home. He calls his wife. Mistake. I'm just kidding. Calls all of his friends. Right? And he tells them about this wonderful banquet that he went to. Just me and the king and the queen. And he says, but as long as there's Mordecai out there, I will be miserable. Can you imagine letting one man make your life miserable? You got a problem. Here he's got the world at his fingertips, does he not? Second in command over Persia. Access to the king and queen. They invite him to their house. He's got all the riches, everything he could ever want. And one little Jew is driving him bonkers. Then says Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends unto him, let a gallows be made, 50 cubits high. 50 cubits high. How high is that? A cubit is 18 inches, right? 75 feet high. Folks, I don't know about you. I'm a little short dude. Okay? That's a bunch of me. Now you're talking about a gallows. You're talking about, what are we talking about? We're talking about a place to hang a man, are we not? And folks, if you're going to build this thing, it's got to be 75 feet. It's got to stand up, right? And once you've got to have a way to the top, don't you? And not only to the top, you also are going to have some kind of a platform that's around it. What I'm trying to get you to understand is this is a massive structure that he is going to erect in one day. Because he's going into the king tomorrow to ask for Mordecai to be hung on those gallows one day. Can you imagine hearing the nails, the cutting, the building, the carts coming through town carrying all the supplies? Everybody knew about what? Haman's gallows in his backyard. Everybody knew. They said that these gallows were hung high enough because the temple was on an elevated place in the city. The palace. And so anytime you were walking at the palace area, you'd be eyeball to eyeball with those gallows. Okay? You hang a man, guess what you get to see for the next few days? You get to see his body swinging out there, don't you? Haman would just be tickled to see Mordecai hanging out there for a while. Birds eating on him. Unbelievable. 50 cubits high. And tomorrow speak unto the king that Mordecai may be hanged thereon. And go thou in merrily with the king unto the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made. Well, his plans got foiled, didn't they? The next day he went in to speak to the king, but some problems arose. Well, that was a whole other act of providence, wasn't it? And he had to go to the banquet, and all of a sudden, Esther exposes him, doesn't he? There's a man who's trying to kill my people. There's a man who has issued a decree that all my people should be killed. Ahasuerus said, who is it? Esther points to him. It's that wicked Haman. That's who it is. Wow. And Harbona, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, behold also the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who spoke good for the king, standeth in the house of Haman. And the king said, hang him thereon. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. What goes around comes around. You build a gallows, you better be careful. You may be hanged on your own gallows. Do people do us wrong? Yeah, there's people who do us wrong. Do people sin against us? Yeah, people sin against us from time to time. How are we supposed to handle that? Get even, that's how you do it. Just get even. Leave vengeance to the Almighty God. Isn't that what the Bible teaches? Romans 12:19. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine. I will repay, saith the Lord. Folks, one day all the wrongs that have ever been committed in the world will be rectified. And God will do that. And guess what? He will do it right, won't He? And there won't be one mistake whatsoever. Be careful about digging a pit for your neighbor. Okay? If I ever walk by and see him doing that, ooh-wee, ain't going to be good. All righty. Thank y'all.